What's up everyone, Hyper here, and welcome to the patch 7.3.2 Frost Decay guide. Now if you're out of the loop or didn't notice, Frost is actually better than Unholy in Antorus. So I thought this would be a good time to put out an updated video with the new information and everything you need to know to do well in this new raid. Let's just jump into it. First, let's look at the pros and cons of the spec. We have very strong sustained damage, along with great AoE and cleave, which is really nice in Antorus because a lot of the bosses actually have quite a few adds on them. Then the other thing is that AMS actually dispels quite a few of the abilities that the bosses have, so we either don't have to worry about them or we can cheese them in some sort of way. The only con that I can really find with this spec is our low mobility. It does become a hindrance from time to time, but as long as you position smart and play around it, it shouldn't be an issue. Let's go over stats, which is the most commonly asked question that I get. Which stats should I go for? How much of each one should I have? Well, as a Frost Decay, you don't have to worry about that. We have what we call fluid stat priority, meaning that as long as you keep a balance of all the stats, you should be good to go. If you stack too much of one stat, you will get diminishing returns, but as long as your stats are kind of in balance, then you're fine. Of course, haste is slightly better than the rest of the secondary stats, so if you do have the choice between two items of the same item level, one has haste and one doesn't, then go with the one with haste. But in general, just try to go for higher item level, because Frost Decay is quantity over quality when it comes to stats. Since haste is better than the rest of the secondaries by a slight margin, I do recommend enchanting and gemming it. And then on your neck, just put Mark of the Claw. For consumables, you can either go with the Strength Feast or the 1% versatility food. They are about the same DPS increase, especially when you get to the higher item levels. On the topic of stats and gearing, I wanted to talk a little bit about special items, which is trinkets, legendaries, and relics. So for trinkets out of Antorus, there's basically three that you're looking at getting. Amenthul's Vision, or Khaz'grat's Courage. These are mutually exclusive, so you can only use one of them. Amenthul's Vision is slightly better DPS-wise, and it also provides some defensive utility, but it is harder to get since the drop rate on it is much lower. Then the third trinket is the Shadow Singed Fang, which drops off of the second boss. For other trinkets that either drop out of Mythic Plus or the previous raid, you're looking at getting Cradle of Anguish, Engine of Eradication, or Arcano Crystal. These are all great choices until you manage to acquire those trinkets from the new raid. As you can see on the screen, I have a full breakdown of the trinkets that you should be looking at getting. Because with Legion, we have Titan Forging, and you might be able to get a really high item level trinket from previous content that might actually be good, so make sure to look at those item level comparisons as well. When it comes to legendaries, our new Biz combo is Bracers and Belt. And then you can also use Soul of Deathlord for heavy AoE fights and Fortified Mythic Plus. The chest, Cold Heart, can be situationally useful, or if you're still using tier 20, then I would go with the chest and the bracers. But this is overall a guide for tier 21, and I definitely suggest going with bracers and belt. For relics, with the introduction of the Netherlight Crucible, we actually have quite a few options to look at. When it comes to single target, Ambidexterity is still our best relic, followed by Nothing But the Boots, which also gives us a huge damage boost if you're running Frostbite in AoE situations, so it's really useful in Mythic Plus. Cold as Ice remains our fallback option. It's the third best relic and it buffs our single target as well as AoE. I have the trait breakdown and weapon eye level breakdown pulled up here on the screen, so you can tell that for some of these traits, if you get a really high item level relic that maybe doesn't have the best trait, it might still be an upgrade for you. So just because a relic has the wrong trait, don't rule it out. Frost Decay is looking really good for tier 2 traits, because all of them are really close together in power, except for Dark Sorrows, but it does gain some DPS when it comes to AoE situations. Now on the dark side, we have Shadowbind as our best in slot. Even though it does slightly less damage than Torment the Weak, it does have the added healing effect that comes in really nice, especially if you're raiding or doing higher end content. And over on the light side, we have Securing the Light, which basically does the same thing as Shadowbind, except you get an inner shield instead of healing. Now for tier 3, just go with the strongest trait you can choose, and if that means going through a weaker tier 2 trait and you're not entirely sure if you want to do that, then I definitely recommend using the Netherlight Crucible weights add-on. I will have the import link for it in the description below, and I also made a short guide a while back whenever this add-on came out, kind of explaining how to use it if you're not familiar with it. Let's go over talents. First up is the single target build. On the first row here, as you can see, we're actually using Shattering Strikes now, which if you don't know what it does yet, I don't blame you. Whenever your target is at 5 stacks of Razor Ice, your next Frost Strike will consume them and deal extra damage. This talent has great interaction with our new tier bonus. Runic Attenuation is still decent, but it does fall slightly behind. In the second row, we're sticking with Murderous Efficiency. Third row, Ice Cap for the reduced cooldown on Pillar of Frost. Then in the fourth row, it doesn't really matter what you pick, but I would suggest just using Winter is Coming, because if there are stunnable adds and you have Remorseless Winter up, they will be stunned. And if they're not stunnable, then it doesn't really matter what you run here because it will just be immune to it. In the row below it, I prefer running Inexorable Assault just for the slight damage boost. If you run into a situation where you basically have maximum uptime on the boss or whatever your target is, and you're not gaining any DPS from it, you might as well run Permafrost or Volatile Shielding for the bonus utility and defensive capabilities. Then in the level 90 row, we're sticking with Gathering Storm for single target. It's still just a great choice, and it synergizes well with Obliteration, and those reduced costs obliterate. And the last row, we're still going with Obliteration. This is a very fast-paced and high APM build, and Obliteration just fits in great with that. Now for Heavy Cleave and Mythic Plus talents, the only row you actually need to change something in is the level 90 row. We go from Gathering Storm to Frostbite. Frostbite becomes better on 3 targets if you don't have it procced. And if you do get a Killing Machine proc, then on 2 targets it becomes better than pressing Obliterate. This talent works great on AoE situations, because it can proc Rime and it also applies Razor Ice to all the targets hit, allowing us to proc our Shattering Strikes more often. Let's go over the playstyle and how Frost DK changed from the last patch. Shattering Strikes added a new level to the DK playstyle because it consumes our Razor Ice debuff on the target. Razor Ice should now be treated similar to Incanter's flow on mages, where at high stacks we hit harder and at low stacks our abilities will be weaker. This means that we try to prioritize using KM and Rime procs whenever we get near the 5 stack mark, and we use Frost Strike whenever we're below that. Once you get to 5 stacks, you will want to consume it at the nearest opportunity, meaning that whenever you don't have a Rime or Killing Machine proc, you should be hitting that Frost Strike to trigger Shattering Strikes. Since this build still runs Gathering Storm, we use this ability the same way as before. Pop Remorseless Winter on cooldown, and in general try pulling a few runes before it becomes available, to immediately empower it. Alright, let's go over the opener and how we use Sindragosa's Fury. Our opener is still very straightforward. You pop Remorseless Winter on pull, then Obliterate, and go straight into Obliteration. And here our goal is to alternate between Obliterate and Frost Strikes. If you get a Rime proc, prioritize using it over Frost Strike if you're not capping runic power. Once our Obliteration is over, we're looking for an opportunity to cast Sindragosa's Fury. And it is a little more difficult to get the timing correctly because we are consuming those Razor Ice stacks. In the ideal situation, you will have Concordance and Fallen Crusader along with Pillar of Frost active coming out of Obliteration. So as soon as you hit 5 Razor Ice stacks, you just cast Syndra. Typically, this doesn't happen, so I tend to just settle for having either Concordance or Fallen Crusader when I cast it. And if neither of them proc, then I just use it anyways on the last global before Pillar runs out. Be very careful not to Frost Strike the global before you cast Sindragosa if you're at 5 stacks, because that will just consume them and greatly reduce the damage that it actually does. Let's talk briefly about tier 21 and how it interacts with the rest of our kit. Our 2-piece is just a straight damage buff. It's boring, but it's a nice DPS increase. Then our 4-piece is a little more interesting. You can proc it by doing any type of frost damage, and the shards which hit your target will also apply 3 stacks of Razor Ice to it, meaning that we will be able to trigger Shattering Strikes way more often than we would be able to without the tier bonus. Next, I just wanted to answer some of the questions that I see very frequently either on Discord or I get asked here on YouTube. Do I use tier 21 4-piece with tier 22 piece? For a lot of people, this will be the way to go in the early weeks of the raid, but once you start getting higher item level upgrades, they will quickly outscale your Antorus tier. The second question that I see on Discord very often is, I haven't gotten my tier 21 yet, so I'm still running 4-piece tier 20. What build and what legendaries should I be using? This guide will not apply to you if you're not using tier 21, so I definitely recommend checking out my patch 7.3 guide, which covers all the information you need to know for the previous tier. And then the third question, which I get asked a ton, is where do I get your weak auras or add-ons? I have a full UI video that has all the resources you need to know, and then my Antorus weak auras are up on my Wago page, and I also made a short YouTube video about them. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. I am more than happy to answer them. As always, if you enjoyed the video, then like the video and consider subbing to the channel. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Legend Hyperion for daily updates on what's going on and also the occasional meme. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.